Welcome to India Urban Conference 2011. It gives us great pleasure to have such esteemed company all under one roof this evening. The IUC is a unique multi-series international conference on urban India. It engages multiple stakeholders in a bottom-up discussion to identify research questions of greatest relevance to urban India and leverage the available data, evidence and experience to develop a more nuanced view of urban India and its dynamics. The India Urban Conference comes to you as a result of a three-way partnership between Janaagraha Center for Citizenship and Democracy, the India Institute of Humanity Settlements, and the South Asian Studies Council at Yale. I take this opportunity to invite on stage Honorable Minister Kumari Selja, Shri N.R. Narayanamurthy, Founder Chairman of Infosys. Welcome, ma'am. Welcome, sir. I also invite upon stage Dr. Shivaramakrishnan and Mr. Aroma Ravi.
In some sense, the three co-partners to this program, which is Janaagraha, IIHS, and Yale, represent three different facets of the kind of inquiries that need to happen to make the urban conversation a truly vibrant and dynamic one. We at Janaagraha are a Bangalore-based non-profit. We work exclusively on urban issues, on urban transformation. We are 10 years old. And what we do in our work is to take in some sense, a citizen-centric approach to examining urban questions. So we believe in participatory processes, but we also recognize that the answers to urban India are not trivial. And what they require is therefore, in some sense, both hands to come together, both supply-side reforms, complex supply-side reforms to address the kind of challenges that we have in urban India, which can only come from government. But also to meet that halfway across the street is to bring a sense of responsibility and understanding and engagement on the part of citizens, and not just one class of citizens, but a whole spectrum of citizens across the social strata. And so that's been, in some sense, the guiding principle about our work. But along the course of this, over the last several years, what we discovered was that while we were sometimes successful, often not, in trying to achieve the outcomes that we wanted, we were very often confronted by the lack of data, by the lack of a more clear-headed understanding of what moved urban India and urban changes in India. And given that we bring only one perspective to this conversation, what we felt would be truly important to have as in terms of a neutral space is to co-create this conference with other partners who could bring their own perspectives and a sense of balance to this conversation. And so in that sense, we are delighted that we have two remarkable institutions as partners, one which is extremely well established and one which has great aspirations to make a fundamental difference to urban India. Yale's, the university needs no introduction, and I'm sure Shivi will do a lot of justice to the South Asia program at Yale and why they are part of it. Aro himself is the founder director of the Indian Institute of Human Settlements, and he will talk about what they are aspiring to do. But for us at Janaagraha, what we hope will happen over the next couple of days is really a multidimensional conversation. And the way we've done this is also in a very participatory way. There are 8 context anchors, 8 themes. Each of you is here because of invitations that you've received from one of such institutions. And each institution which is doing this has been doing serious, remarkable work in these fields over the last several years. So each of the themes, whether it's urban education, which is Pratham, urban health, which is Public Health Foundation of India, urban water, which is Argyam, urban infrastructure, which IIHS, land and infrastructure, which IIHS itself is anchoring, urban inclusion, which IFMR is anchoring, urban culture, which Drona is taking care of, the urban planning, which the SPA and India Urban Space, which Swati Anchors takes care of, and finally, urban governance and citizenship, which Janaagraha is anchoring. These are the 8 context anchors who have, in turn, taken responsibility to design our individual themes. And not only are we designing it in terms of individual panels, which are, say, specific to the theme, but also having deep dives, which are hopefully cross-sectoral, because the challenges that we face are not in silos. The real world doesn't come in conveniently packaged problems, but they come in interdisciplinary issues. So how do we bring that sense of conversation, which is what we hope to achieve through the deep dive discussions. And finally, and most importantly, we all know that India is a young country, but even the issues of research and data and discussions around this need to be infused by the energy of the youth. So each of us has brought in youngsters who are on the ground, sometimes doing field work, sometimes in universities. IIHS itself has got a unique component, which is Shankranti, which Aro will talk about. So a large portion of this conference is also about bringing youngsters to this. And the backdrop against which all of this is happening, of course, is the extraordinary urbanization trajectory of urban India. You just need to look no further than the census data of 2011 to see how things are changing in barely a decade. Between 2001 and 2011, the Census of India, which just published its data, showed that we have now close to 8,000 census towns in India, 7,935 to be precise. But that's an increase of more than 2,000 census-defined towns since the last census, just the last decade, which is a growth of almost 50% in what the census defines of urban settlements in our country. And many of you would know that the Census of India has the most aggressive definition of what they consider to be an urban settlement. They use 3 criteria, which is a minimum habitation of 5,000. They use an income criteria, which is at least 75% of the male population of that settlement having non-agricultural income, and they use a density component as well. And there's no other country in the world that uses such a high bar to define what constitutes an urban settlement. If we used a lower bar, that of many other countries, as of the 2001 census, we would have actually added another 180 million people to be considered living in urban settlements, which means that the number is truly much larger than the 330 million that we suggest today live in our cities and towns. And our policy responses to this galloping urbanization have been slow. And for the first 60 years, in fact, we almost ignored the challenges of urbanization, and I would submit had a dysfunctional approach to addressing these challenges, in the sense that either we were in denial that this was a problem, or we were in the mistaken belief that we could solve the problems of urbanization by addressing rural India, which means somehow living under the fallacious notion that if only we could make rural India more habitable, we wouldn't see people coming into urban India. Unfortunately, there's no country in the world that's had a trajectory of economic development that matches that hypothesis. If you look across the world, every country has seen urbanization as the Siamese twin of economic development, and India certainly is going to be no different. So what we are confronted with is this tsunami of urbanization. And all of us in this room and many others who are outside need to contribute to this conversation, because there are complex forces at play. Urban is this unusual canvas on which all of the challenges that we see in the modern world get played out, which means it is at once a social sector, all the challenges of health and education and poverty, but it is also an economic sector, because it is the engine, it is the flywheel of our economic story, the 8% story. 70% of our GDP is going to come from our cities. So how do we reconcile these challenges? How do we look at this in the context of the environmental issues, the poverty issues, the population issues, the infrastructure challenges? What we submit is none of these challenges can be addressed without meaningful data. And what we hope to do through this conference, and hopefully many more to come, is to begin a process of having intense disagreements, but around data.
In November 2008, the Yale president, Richard Levin, announced the Yale India Initiative, in fact, while on a trip to India in New Delhi. And the idea was to create at Yale a program that would make Yale preeminent in the study of India and South Asia. We are now moving into what might be considered the second phase of this initiative, in which we are looking to focus on selected thematic areas like urbanization, public and global health, law, governance and citizenship, Himalayan environment and development, literature and the arts, liberal arts education in India, and leadership training and problem-focused research in modern and contemporary India. And this requires us to develop more of a presence in India, and we will need to identify a range of partners with whom we would expand relations across these themes and selected areas. While there is much I can say about the kinds of things that we are doing in several of these areas, In the interest of brevity, let me just say that we are very excited about our emerging focus on urban India. This is the context for the series of Urban India conferences that we have organized in partnership with leading civil society organizations and upcoming new and innovative institutes of higher education. Our principal partners, of course, as Ramesh has noted, is Janaagraha Center for Citizenship and Democracy and the Indian Institute for Human Settlements. We began with a conference at Yale in April 2011, where we considered historical processes and the contemporary experience of urban India through a series of papers by academic researchers and some social activists and policy planners on themes relating to urban planning, governance, land and urban infrastructure, migration and informal economies, the city and public culture, desire and belonging in the city. From this first set of deliberations, we have fashioned two other sets of meetings. I am delighted to see that over 600 people have been registered to join this major international conference at this wonderful state-of-the-art campus of Infosys in Mysore. And we look forward to being in New Delhi on November 21st and 22nd for a policy workshop or conference with high-level government officials and leaders, policy analysts, and academic specialists on urban India to discuss the challenges of urbanization and the future directions that we might take in research and training.
We are at a very, very critical juncture in the history of this country. We're on a trajectory that maybe China started about 20 years ago, where we're shifting from being a rural agrarian culture to being an urban, industrial, and post-industrial maybe culture. And that's really something that happens maybe once in the history of a nation. And the people who wrote the constitution of this country did not imagine the country would be like this 60 years ago. Our constitution is written with an orientation of a culture and a civilization that's essentially rural. There are some aspirations to the urban. And it's interesting because many of our top political leaders at that point of time actually grew from urban areas, whether it's Sardar Patel or Panditji or whatever it is. So we are faced with a very interesting challenge. We have a structure and processes that were designed and imagined in a different India, and it's starting to change now very quickly. Of course, South Asia and India in particular is quite different from many other parts of the world because our levels of urbanization are much lower than what our GDP should actually sort of enable us to be. We only are about 31% urban at this point of time, just 375 million people. In actual fact, and this is a debate that we're going to open up here and certainly in Delhi next Monday, we might actually have somewhere between 80 to 150 million people who live in places that are urban in character but are not classified as urban. And that has a dramatic implication not only for public policy, but the way you look at the world. So that's one thing that's quite important. The other thing, of course, one of the fundamental challenges that we face over the next 20 years is, at the moment, about 60% of our economic output comes from cities. In fact, some of the evidence that we'll show to you over the next few days shows that the top 100 cities of this country, about 15% of the population, produce 40% of the economic output. So just 100 cities produce 40% of the economic output. And India, as we know, has been growing at 6.5% per capita in the last many years. But the interesting thing, of course, is something that most of us don't know, and we've just made the calculations on that, is that these 100 cities occupy less than 0.26% of the land area. So there's a tremendous amount of economic concentration, which has happened in many other parts of the world. But this is something that's not adequately addressed in our frame of national development. And I think the challenge for us is not to only talk about cities and towns, but to make the linkage between cities, towns, and villages. And this is one key question which I hope we will start interrogating here, whether it's in terms of education, or it's in terms of healthcare, or in terms of water, or services, or a whole range of other questions. Because India has a unique opportunity. At the current point of time, like Ramesh said, we have 8,000 urban centers. There's been an upsurge in the last 10 years. But we have 640,000 villages. So the core question that we look at from the macro perspective is, what will India be like in 2050 When India has a population of about 1.5 billion, we're about 1.2 billion at the current point of time, what will it be like? Will we have 500,000 villages or will we have 100,000? This is an extensive academic debate. I think Professor Kundu will pick this up. We've been sparring on this for a long time just now. But the sense that one has is that the order of magnitude will not be less than a few 100,000. What does that mean in practice? So even if the number of towns and cities goes up to 3 or 4 times from 8,000 to 20 or 30,000, the question is the number of cities and the number of villages are different by a factor of 1:100. Now, is that a challenge? If you were Latin American or if you're European and maybe North American, you'd see that as a serious challenge. But I think for us, it's a tremendous opportunity. And the opportunity is very real because the 21st century is a century that is going to be constrained by a whole range of resources. India is constrained in terms of land. India is constrained in terms of water. India is constrained in terms of infrastructure. And the movement over the 21st century is going to move towards decentralized systems of management of water, of energy, and of natural resources. So we have the largest market in the world. India will be the largest single population in 20 or 25 years' time when we surpass China. But we're also building this largest integrated market in the world. But that market is going to be a highly decentralized market. 500,000 or 400,000 villages and maybe 10 or 20,000 urban centers. That particular opportunity actually links with the best technologies that we have. We know that we have to move to a renewables regime in terms of energy. We know that we have to handle water in a decentralized manner. We know that we have to deepen democracy across the country. So the opportunity for us is actually to build a new trajectory, a new path of development, which is not the same as it is in Latin America, which is, in a sense, the precursor to us. It's absolutely not the same as it is in Western Europe or in North America. And it isn't what the Chinese are currently doing. So we have a tremendous opportunity here that we have to seize. We have to be able to do that in dramatically different ways. And our current frameworks of thinking and engagement do not allow us to do that.
I am extremely delighted to see this resounding support from practitioners, from policy implementers, from businesses, from students, from academia, and from the government in supporting development and transition of urban India. Forums such as this will help us highlight the growing problems of urbanization and provide us a mechanism to find innovative solutions using multi-stakeholder support. I want to thank the teams from the Indian Institute of Human Settlement, Janaagraha Center for Citizenship and Democracy, and the South Asian Studies Council of Yale University for putting the spotlight on one of the key issues arising from the rapid development of India. India's 8% growth in the 11th plan between 2007 and 2012 has resulted in rapid urbanization. The last census data, that is the census data of 2011, shows that urbanization in India now stands at 31.16% in 2011 compared with 27.81% in 2001. This means that we have more than 1/3 of Indians, that is close to 377 million Indians, out of the total of 1.2 billion Indians living in urban areas. This has resulted, as you people know extremely well, in severe pressures on existing infrastructure, land, housing, transportation, water, sanitation, electricity, education, health, and other civic amenities. And this phenomenon is only set to deteriorate further unless a large-scale and swift action is taken, thanks to conferences like these. According to a study by the McKinsey Global Institute, India will see this trend of urbanization increase to about 40% by 2030. That translates to another 100 million additional Indians joining the current urban population, resulting in a total of approximately 500 million Indians living in urban India by 2030. India's investment in urban infrastructure has to therefore increase sharply in the coming years to match with the increasing requirements arising out of the urban boom that we will see in the next 20 years. The McKinsey Global Institute also estimates that India will invest close to $300 billion in urban infrastructure development in the next 20 years. This large investment spend entails significant change in our current spending. Government alone will not be able to support this development. This would therefore call for more public-private partnerships. And I believe this is where the contribution of an extraordinary institution like Janaagraha becomes extremely important. To aid these investments, we need to raise the current level of stakeholders' understanding of these urban problems. I think that's where, once again, this conference becomes extremely important in our future course of action. A key factor that can indeed allow proper analysis of current and future scenarios will help gauge and garner stakeholder support, will aid the changes that we need to bring about in our planning processes and policy-making processes, provided we make sure that we have proper data available. And I'm very impressed with the theme of this conference, Evidence and Experience, which depends on the collection and dissemination of data and on discussions based on data, because we at Infosys have practiced a very important adage during the last 30 years, and that is, in God we trust, everybody else brings data to the table. I hope in the next 4 days, this forum will identify and ideate around these important issues and enable and educate policymakers and stakeholders with a data-driven and evidence-driven solutions. While we do so, a key aspect to remember is what our Prime Minister has been emphasizing time and again, and that is inclusive growth. Inclusive growth will therefore translate to bridging the gap between the haves and the have-nots, whether it is in urban India or rural India, whether it is between the rich and the poor, and whether it is between the educated and the not so well educated. Second, it is all about bringing civilian and policy makers closer for urban development and getting them all together in charting the future course of action as well as a sound development plan for urban India. I have no doubt at all, knowing as I do, Swati Ramanathan and Ramesh Ramanathan and other people engaged in this conference, that we will indeed come out with a set of policy recommendations which, with a dynamic and highly supportive minister that we have here, we will be in a position to find the required solutions to these huge problems that we face.
This Urban Conference 2011 has been designed, I understand, as part of a series of events to launch an ongoing discussion on India's critical urban issues. The efforts are timely, as we are moving on our part into the 12th five-year plan with the strategy of faster and more inclusive growth. Cities will have to play a key role in operationalizing this strategy. I would like to compliment IIHS, Janaagraha, and other organizers for their efforts. We are today living in an urban world, as more than 50% of the global population is already living in cities. Countries in Europe, North America, and Latin America who have moved to a stable urban formation with more than 75 to 80% of their populations living in urban areas are also the most developed countries. Economic growth and urbanization go hand in hand. The 21st century will see Asia becoming a predominantly urban society, with India, China, and Indonesia, the largest countries in Asia, graduating to higher levels of urbanization. Urbanization in this regard has been one of the most important instruments of poverty reduction in history, and Asian economies, including India, are now firmly on that path. Urbanization also offers huge challenges and opportunities. Those who successfully address these challenges will surge ahead to a higher trajectory of economic growth and human development. Internationally, too, countries in Europe, North America, and Latin America over the century have taken proactive steps through policies and investment strategies to address the challenges of urbanization so as to make the process beneficial to its people and economies. We in India, too, are committed to convert the urban challenges into opportunities. Since the launch of the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission in the year 2005, the Government of India has demonstrated its intention by embarking on a massive program of support for investment and urban sector reforms in states to address key urban concerns. Projections estimate that India's urban population, currently at 377 million, would reach 600 million by 2031. The country is also likely to have about 50% of its population living in cities and towns by the year 2041. The huge increase in urban population is bound to be a daunting challenge for policymakers and planners. Cities are about people, and people need space, shelter, infrastructure, services, and employment. We have to meet not only the backlog and current needs of the existing urban population, but also the growth needs of millions of new urban residents. The challenges of land, housing, infrastructure, basic services, employment, environment, poverty, and exclusion are colossal, but not unmanageable, as demonstrated by many countries throughout history. The issue of urban governance will be central as it cuts across all these. Cities are, as we all know, engines of productivity and growth. Urbanization has currently given an impetus to the country's GDP. 60% of India's GDP is produced in urban agglomerations. However, I would not hesitate to admit that our urbanization has also been haphazard and unplanned. This has resulted in urban sprawl, slums, and exclusion. The issues of urban poverty are coming to the fore. 2004-05 NSSO estimates revealed the number of urban poor at 81 million. As per Pranab Sen committee, the population is estimated at 93 million in 2011. Unless the issues of inclusion are handled effectively alongside growth, a scenario of urbanization of rural poverty would emerge as in many developing countries. This will undermine the contribution of cities to growth. India's economic growth cannot be sustained if the benefits of urbanization do not percolate to all the sections of the society, especially the common man. We in the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation have been continuously working to bring the concerns of the marginalized and the poorer sections of urban society to the center stage of urban policy formulation. We have been somewhat successful in our efforts. Today, the concerns of the urban poor are not only informing the policy, but also guiding it. We realize that the concerns of poverty cannot be isolated from the broader challenges of managing urbanization. The issues of land, housing, and infrastructure cannot be addressed without looking into the paradigms of urban planning and governance. But we are equally aware that if urban planning and governance are not inclusive, urbanization cannot be sustainable.